time, bring in Steve, the tour guide. In fact, before he comes on, just a couple quick things. He's a longtime friend of mine. We've done tours in Israel together as a tour guide. Just been awesome having him and many of you, maybe that are even here, have been able to spend a lot of time with Steve there in Israel. But one thing, everybody comes back from our Israel tour, they always are just really amazed at Steve's vast knowledge of so much, really, the region. He's a former IDF soldier, did some time in the military there. He's a tour guide and has been, but sort of in semi-retirement, I think. But he still guides for a few groups. And thankfully, we're one of those groups. But studied Greek, Roman, Jewish literature of the Second Temple period at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I appreciate him to be extremely knowledgeable about the Arab-Israeli conflict, as well as many other topics. Whenever I travel over there and get to hang out and do tours in Israel, one of my favorite things is to go and sit down and drink some iced tea by the Red Sea and talk to Steve about, I think he gets coffee, but I get iced tea. And we just talk about a lot of stuff, everything from the Bible to geopolitics to any number of things. And he's just a wealth of information. Spent much of his life, maybe most of his life, living in Jerusalem, and just a great dude. So let's give a warm Athey Creek welcome for Steve, the tour guide. Yeah. Got the balloons. That's great. You know, I thought, is he in prison? He's got an orange jumpsuit on. I was like, did you do? Yeah. No. Do we have good audio there, guys? Oh, good. How are you doing, buddy?
How are you doing?
You first.
Good, and you? Good, and how are you?
Good. This has been quite a deal. I've been excited to talk to you, and I think we've got a trip coming up. You're going to go with us on Paul's missionary journeys coming up this next summer, and he can't really officially guide our tour there, but you're going to hang with us. And on the ship, we're going to have Steve do some sessions with us that are going to be outstanding. I'm looking forward to that. So that's coming up soon.
I am too. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I am.
Good.
When we're in Turkey, mum's the word that I'm an Israeli tour guide.
That's right. Yeah. We won't tell anybody. But remember, I took you over to Jordan once with us, and you weren't supposed to be technically with us there either. But we had a few fun experiences on that journey. I thought I was going to have to pull Steve off of one guy there at the Petra.
I remember that. I remember that at Petra. Somebody claimed I looked like Ariel Sharon, which I don't. And I told him he looked like Saddam Hussein, which he did. And that riled him up.
Do you remember what he said when you said he looked like Saddam Hussein?
Yeah, he said Saddam is a good man. You remember he said that?
Yeah.
Saddam is a good... But this was after Saddam was killed. Was executed.
Yeah, didn't he say something like, all I ever want to be is Saddam Hussein? That's what he said.
Yeah.
So that was a little interesting moment.
But it's crazy because I was in Petra only a year ago, and I got a reminder. You know how Facebook will sometimes give you a memory from a year ago? And I couldn't believe it because it seems like 10 years ago. You know, and so much has happened in the world since a year ago that whatever happened a year ago already seems like a decade ago.
I totally relate to what you're saying. There's so much happening in the world, and we live in exciting times, but there's real consequences to what's going on, and that's really what I'm glad to have you here with us. You know, you and I have been talking about Iran, the Arab-Israeli conflict for years, and watching these proxy attacks, from these other. But the first thing that I'd like to ask, just from your perspective, what makes this attack this weekend? What makes this different than maybe everything else that we've been watching? And the second question maybe with that is, what do you think Iran's attempting to do? What do you think their end game was there?
Sure. So it was new in two ways. For the past few decades, Iran has opted to fight Israel via proxies, not directly. In other words, let other people fight on its behalf and die on its behalf. Now, Israel mistakenly honored those rules, agreed to those rules, and when it would retaliate against, it would only retaliate against these proxies, rarely against Iran itself. Now, of course, there were always clandestine Mossad operations to kill nuclear scientists or to sabotage centrifuge factories and stuff like that, but never an overt operation. So that's one difference. Now, the second one you'll find interesting because you quoted some of these Guinness record type things, and now I'm going to really shock you with one of them. In the very first day of the American Gulf War against Saddam Hussein, the first Gulf War, if you remember, the campaign was called Shock and Awe. And it used approximately 500 ballistic missiles over a 24-hour period. This attack by Iran used almost 350 such missiles in only 1 or 2 hours. So that just shows you the intensity, because we all remember the shock and awe campaign in Baghdad. You know, for those of us who are old enough to remember the images on CNN as they were showing that, all of that was condensed into just a couple hours. So that too was innovative, you know, a new milestone in world combat history.
Wow. And so do you think that was their main objective, shock and awe? Or what do you think Iran thinks they're going to gain? Obviously, they were what some might call extremely unsuccessful with killing people or blowing up places, but they may have been successful in a little bit of the shock and awe, what they did there. What do you think?
So Iran had a real problem, which is on April 1st, Israel killed 7 of their senior generals in a building that has been incorrectly referred to as an embassy or a consulate in Damascus. This was a legitimate target, as these they belong to a militia of Iran that coordinates with Hezbollah and Hamas. It's sort of like their personnel between Tehran, Hezbollah, and Hamas were all congregated together in that building, and that was a golden opportunity and a legitimate target for Israel to hit. Now, Iran had a choice. For many years, Israel had been attacking their positions in Syria and doing these clandestine attacks in Iran itself against their nuclear program. And Iran felt it had to respond or lose face with its own population, as well as lose face with its its admirers among these proxies all over the Middle East. So it felt like it had to do something. But at the same time, it was the most telegraphed attack in history. It let everybody know 2 weeks in advance that it was coming. And it informed the United States maybe even a couple days before even the nature of the attack. In other words, it really telegraphed its punches. So that has caused some people to say, of course, that they didn't mean for it to be a deadly attack. Now, Israel's response, at least vocally, to that is, if any one of these ballistic missiles would have gone through Israel's defense systems, each of these ballistic missiles carried a 1-ton warhead, and could have killed hundreds of people. So again, there would be no allowance for even one mistake, where is the truth in that? Between it telegraphing what it would do, it communicated to Turkey, Iran communicated to Turkey, which is a NATO member, its intent to both attack as well as what the nature of the attack would be. And Turkey, being a NATO member, was obligated to report this to the United States, its fellow NATO member, which then reported it to Israel. So it wasn't a total surprise. So where's the truth somewhere? Where is the middle in all this? Yes, it was telegraphed, but do I think Iran is disappointed that some of their missiles didn't get through? In other words, did they really think that 99% would not get through? No, I don't think so. I do think that they thought at least something would get through. They definitely did want to do damage. Now, they said that their 2 main targets was an Air Force base in the Negev Desert, as well as another target on the Golan Heights. So they claim that the targets were all military, not civilian. But again, they launched 300 projectiles. And it's not like all 300 of them are on their way to those 2 targets alone. Why was there any missiles flying over Jerusalem? Neither the Negev or the Golan Heights is in that trajectory at Jerusalem. So they were headed elsewhere, maybe to what's called the Kiryat in Tel Aviv, which is Israel's version of the Pentagon. which Iran would see as a legitimate target because it's a defense. Now, that's in the middle of a very densely populated neighborhood in Tel Aviv. So if that would have succeeded to hit that target, that could have killed several hundred people, if not more. So I don't know exactly where the truth is on that. You know, it's true that they telegraphed it, which means they didn't want it to be a total surprise, but it's also true that I think they wanted some of it to get through the defense systems, and almost nothing did. So in a way, they go away defeated, or they look weak. Does that make sense?
It does. You know, I'm going to put up a picture here of Netanyahu and Biden. Yeah, I don't think you can see this, Steve, but it's a funny picture.
I do see it, actually. Yeah, I see it. Yeah, I see it in the back there. Yeah, yeah.
So the reason I put this up, you know, Biden, you know, the world awaits Israel's response. I think that's what everybody's kind of holding their breath for now. What's Israel going to do?
That's right.
It seems that Biden warned Netanyahu that the U.S. will not, you know, support a counterattack, and fears, you know, an all-out Middle Eastern war. You know, Biden, he kind of said his famous, "Come on, man, you know, take the win." You know, Biden was saying, you guys won. I have a hard time thinking, if I'm Israel, thinking, oh, so we won. We had over 300, you know, rockets, drones, you know, pile on our country. Somebody I heard said that Israel maybe spent $1 billion just last night.
$1.3 billion.
$1.3 billion.
Yeah.
You know, that's a hit right there.
But sure, but you know what, Brett, you can liken it, you know, let's say you watch two combatants, a boxing match, and one of the boxers has, you know, good defense. So the whole fight, he's just pummeled. You know, he's pummeled. Let's say his opponent hits him with an average of 100 punches a round. A few of them get through, but everybody's marveled with the guy's defense. But who won the fight? In your opinion, the guy who just curled himself in the corner with impeccable defense, or the guy that, you know, hit him 1,000 times over 12 rounds? Obviously, the guy who hit him 1,000 times over 12 rounds looks like the aggressor and the winner. But look, the most obvious question to ask is, what would the United States do if 300 such projectiles were launched at it? You know, and nobody in America would accept the advice of Israel or anybody else. Show restraint. You know, in other words, it's the hypocrisy and it's the double standards that are offensive in all this.
Yeah, I agree. So what's Israel's next move? If you could guess, as a former IDF soldier, knowing the way Israel rolls, what's the next move?
So look, last night because another thing that made this unique in the history of warfare, and especially media coverage of it, is that everybody was already broadcasting the attack before it even happened. You know, I mean, we were basically told in 2 to 4 hours from now, so many projectiles are expected to hit Israel. So, I mean, so what was happening was the Security Cabinet of Israel convened while these projectiles were on their way, and several of them were in favor of launching an immediate counterattack, a real devastating counterattack that would have arrived to Iran before their rockets hit Israel. I mean, this would have been very dramatic. But what happened was, while they were conferring about this in the security meeting, that's when Joe Biden called, and Bibi or Netanyahu had to leave the room to take the call, and he came back and said, "Look, let's not do that." You know, we're being asked now to be fair, and for those of you that watch any of my updates that I do on YouTube, I try to be fair. I'm not a political animal on this. I'm not automatically, you know, out to slander this leader, or, you know, or whitewash this leader. You could argue that President Biden had a right to at least have his voice heard, you know, considering that the American Navy was sent there to help shoot down these incoming rockets. From the moment that America engaged to help Israel in its defense, it became a participant in the. In other words, it had a right as a voice to. Now, I don't necessarily agree with the substance of what Biden asked, but at the same time, it's not like he didn't have a right to at least be heard. After all, he's now investing American assets in helping Israel in that time of need, so he felt like he had the right to at least have his voice heard. Wow,
that's good. How long could Israel keep this up, and how much because that was Iran, but I do wonder, spending 1.2, 1.3 billion dollars, you can't just do that every night. And I think there's a lot more of those missiles, even, up in Syria, there's rockets and missiles. Can Israel do this kind of indefinitely, and does Netanyahu, does he really need to build a coalition if he's going to move forward with some kind of a,
it's a great question. So look, the real question that you're asking, and it's a great question, and I haven't heard anybody address this question today, is could Israel have handled all of that by themselves last night without American help? In my opinion, the answer is yes. From what I understand, Israel could have handled that entirely by themselves. But the fact that America offered it, Israel took it. In other words, it did mitigate or take some of the burden off its shoulders. So, but could it have? But look, what's the problem? What happens? Iran has thousands of ballistic missiles, and it only launched 120 ballistic missiles. Of the 330 things that were launched last night, it was a combination of drones, which fly at only 150 or 200 miles an hour, cruise missiles that fly about the speed of a commercial jet, about 500 to 600 miles per hour, and the ballistic missiles, which would arrive in 12 minutes. It's that latter that's the most dangerous of the three. And Iran only shot 120 of them approximately, and it has thousands of them. Now, what would happen if it were to launch 500, 600, 700, 800 of those? Could Israel handle that entirely on its own? I don't think so. And therefore, it has to weigh that in its retaliation. How ready is Israel for the second wave, which is sure to come if it hits Iran? No, I'm not saying that they shouldn't hit them, but I'm just saying that it won't come for free. There'll be another wave, and it will probably be a much more severe wave. Now, it will likely, even though the United States said that they won't aid and abet Israel in the offense, I still think America will be there to help in the defense. And it's probably in that next attack from Iran where I could see where America would really need, not offensively. And this is very important that I say this to you. I sort of regret you're only a church audience. I rather say this to non-believers and people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and all these people that claim that the Jews need America to fight its battles. That's not true. Central to the Zionist ethos is that the Jews became a state again in 1948 with its own army, air force, and ability. And it's an honor to fight and die for our own battles. We don't want other people to fight our battles. So it's not like we want American soldiers. And by the way, American soldiers have never fought on the ground on behalf of Israel, ever. So we're not talking about the United States entering the war as an offensive attacker against Iran, but rather like you saw last night where naval ships with their own version of Israel's anti-defense rockets, would be used to buttress what Israel has.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That does. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
You mentioned, the United States helping out a little bit. There were a couple surprises, at least from my perspective. The French chipped in, and even more shocking to me, the Jordanians chipped in. Which,
sure.
What do you make of that? That's got to shake up Iran just a little bit to have. They kind of got the whole Middle Eastern skies were closed down, and Israel had total control over the Middle Eastern skies. That's got to make some of these more radical Arab nations think twice. What do you think?
Well, the phenomenon that you saw last night where Jordan participated in it, this has been years in the making. A former prime minister by the name of Naftali Bennett was interviewed today in English on CNN, I think, and I heard him say that it was his administration that helped to put all that together. Basically a regional air defense system where Israel would protect the Arabs, not all the Arabs, but Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf Arab states. In return, those states would protect Israel. A mutual defense pact to protect each other's airspace should any of them be attacked by Iran. Now, Israel, since the 1970s, has had a pact with Jordan that if anybody ever invades Jordan by land, And this did happen, by the way. Syria invaded Jordan back in the late 1970s, or I forget the exact year, but I believe it was still in the 1970s. And Israel threatened to invade Syria and to attack it because it considers Jordanian territory to be its buffer zone between it and the rest of the hostile Muslim world. So Israel and Jordan in particular have had a mutual defense pact for decades. But in terms of the form you saw it last night take, where it was entirely shooting down incoming rockets, where everybody's airspace became one common airspace, that's an agreement that was worked out in the last few years, even before Bibi was the prime minister and his latest manifestation as prime minister. That was already ironed out.
That's interesting. After October 7th, there was much of the world showed, kind of solidarity and really empathy and camaraderie even with Israel's cause. But that seemed to last for like 10 minutes.
Right.
It really.
And so will this.
That's the thing. If
Israel
doesn't act quickly on this, they won't have much support. Do you think that's fair? And do you think Israel will wait?
So it can go either way. Like on the one hand, by waiting, it's sort of proving, at least to America, which is the only partner of Israel that really counts. Hey, look, we're not reacting in some testosterone rush. We're doing what you said. We're acting coolly and measurably. So maybe that's meant to appease America, not so much. But I really, to be honest with you, I think it's smart for Israel to at least deliberate for a couple of days on the nature of this attack. Now, I sent you a couple of weeks ago a thread on Twitter, and I told you it was the best thread that I ever encountered on Israel's real firepower, which is it's got its own ballistic missiles, which have a range of 15,000 kilometers. We're talking about 10,000 miles. It can reach anywhere, even in our hemisphere, Israeli missiles. They have submarines capable of launching those missiles tipped with nuclear weapons. Each of these missiles that Israel has is capable of carrying a 12 megaton nuclear warhead. So when I sent you that, I remember when I texted you, I said it wouldn't be such a stretch for us to say that Israel's a near superpower in its own right.
Yeah.
The only thing that Israel lacks in its arsenal that America has are aircraft carriers. But in truth, when you consider these ballistic missiles known as the Jericho 3 that have this range that I just said of 15,000 kilometers, somebody sitting there in the audience can do a converter of kilometers and miles, because I'm not good at that, but it's maybe about 10 or 12,000 miles radius. That means Israel can project its power over the entire globe and hit an enemy wherever they are in the world, basically. It's presumed to have a nuclear arsenal between 200 and 400 nuclear warheads. It's presumed to have electric magnetic pulse weapons. Everything that the United States has and Russia has in its arsenal, Israel has in its arsenal, just less numbers of them.
Yeah, I've even heard, speaking of electromagnetic pulse, I heard one, Israeli pundit talk about how that'd be a great retaliation is for them to detonate an EMP over Iran, and just would cause havoc. But it seems to me like Israel holds those weapons a little tighter maybe than that.
Sure, but look, one of the problems is, and I hope I don't scare your audience when I tell you this, because I'll use America as the guinea pig for this experiment. I've read very credible reports that say if a country like the United States were to ever be hit with an electronic magnetic pulse, that 90% of the population would be wiped out. Now, of course, you may ask, well, I don't get it. It's an explosion in the air. It's not meant to kill people with radiation. The problem is it would fry the entire food chain of refrigeration, freezer trucks. None of us, for the most part, go out and hunt for our food. The entire food chain would collapse because the entire American food chain depends on refrigeration and freezer conditions, and that would be destroyed. So about 90% of it is considered a weapon of mass destruction. It's true that it may not kill everybody immediately on impact, but tell me who's the luckier person, the person that has a megaton bomb explode over their head and they die instantly versus a population that dies over a month of starvation.
Yeah.
So if Israel were ever to use such a weapon on Iran, it would be considered an attack with a weapon of mass destruction.
Yeah.
That's why it's reserved using weapons like that.
So I've got an article here, the Express article. Russia moves supersonic missile warship to Middle East after Iran attack on Israel. Now, as Bible prophecy, we kind of wonder, what does Ezekiel 38 have to do? I'm going to talk more about that probably later tonight, but I don't see this being the Ezekiel 38 attack, but you can kind of see how players are moved around and what's going on. What do you make of Russia sending their supersonic missile warship there? And also last week I mentioned at the Prophecy Update, and even this whole week, it seems Russia's putting more troops up on the Golan Heights border. What do you make of that? Is there anything that we should be knowing about the Russian involvement, what they think about all this?
Sure. Well, look, as you know, I don't sensationalize and claim any minute there's going to be a biblical event, although it could happen. No, what we're seeing is a replay of the Cold War. Basically in the last couple of years, Russia's become the Soviet Union again. It doesn't mean that it's unlike the communist Soviet Union that was part of a revolution to spread communism around the world. That's obviously not Russia's intent today, but it is trying to make Russia great again. It doesn't like the American world order. Neither does China, neither does Iran. They're sort of a trifecta of three: Russia, China, and Iran. So this is their way of just telling the United States, as the Soviet Union did during the Cold War, don't think you're alone in the world. There's a counterweight, a countervailing weight to your power, and you have to take it seriously. And they're right. They're right in that. The Russians have an arsenal of over 1,000, a few thousand nuclear warheads. I think they have more than the United States does. So what we're seeing is a replay of the Cold War, and it started up. I'm sure people debate exactly when this latest iteration of the Cold War started again, but at least in the last couple years, when the whole Ukraine war started. But you could argue it even started before that. So that's what we're seeing now. Russia flexing its muscles and saying, don't poo-poo us. We're still a great power.
But let me ask you this. Some of those weapons Iran deployed are Russians. Iran sold Russia some of those same drones, and they're using against the Ukrainians. And even some of the rockets back and forth. Was this maybe a little embarrassing for Russia to see how ineffective some of those weapons that they're actually using themselves were so ineffective against Israel?
Well, unfortunately for Ukraine, those weapons have been more effective because Ukraine doesn't have Israel's air defense systems. Now, Ukraine requested from Israel to sell its air defense systems, and Israel turned them down because, as you said, Russia occupies part of Syria on Israel's border, and the Russians let Israel know that if Israel got involved in that war, they would take that as a personal slight. And you have to understand that for the last few years, the Russians have allowed Israel to have thousands of sorties in Syria that hit Hezbollah and Iranian positions. Israel actually has a hotline. You remember in the Cold War, there used to be a phone line called the hotline between the Oval Office and, Khrushchev for the Oval Office. Israel has a similar hotline with the senior commanders of the Russian army in Syria. And they were basically told that if they were to give those air defense weapons to Ukraine, that hotline would no longer exist, and Israel would end up fighting the Russian Air Force. So that's why these weapons have worked in Ukraine, but they haven't worked in Israel. Israel's technology that you're seeing is, and I'm probably exaggerating if I say light years, but it is way ahead of what Ukraine has, both in its ability as well as its numerically, its deployment throughout Israel's and then another thing, if I can just say, Brett, Israel's only 70 miles wide. We have to remember this. Israel's 250 miles long and 70 miles wide, and that includes the West Bank. The world wants Israel to give up the West Bank, which would reduce Israel to only being 9.5 miles wide. So it's also an easier country to defend, not from ground troops, but it's an easier country to defend with these type of arrow missile David sling in the Iron Dome, because there's less territory to cover with these defense systems. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see? There's some people saying World War III, like this whole Middle East conflict could spark World War III, and people toss that around a lot. What do you think?
Yeah. So I don't think I've never been afraid of this Israel stuff with Iran being World War III. I've always been afraid of the Ukraine-Russia thing becoming World War III. Now, I know that's not the subject that you're interviewing me about it, but I do have a lot of opinions about it and some knowledge of it. And I do feel we all should be afraid of what's happening in Europe. That always has the potential to become a World War III. And there is no such thing as a limited nuclear war. A nuclear war, the only level it happens on is all-out destruction for both sides. So that's the theater I've always been worried about. Or a war between the United States and United States against nuclear China over Taiwan could be a World War III Armageddon situation. But do I think the current Middle East wars? No. Of those three theaters, Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Iran, and China, America over Taiwan, the Israel-Iran one has the least danger to the world.
Yeah, that's good. I agree. What are we Americans missing on if you could say the number one thing that we're missing on the whole, everything from the October 7th and Hamas and Gaza, if you could summarize for us, what does Steve the tour guide say? Man, most people are thinking wrongly about this thing. What would you say? Sure,
it's easy to sum up, and it's a shame because there's no solution to it, which is that those of us who live in Israel or have lived in Israel have an experiential knowledge that Americans don't have of what it's like to live under a constant existential threat. Remember, I said that Israel is only 70 miles wide with the territory it captured in the Six-Day War. It means that the country has no strategic depth, that an enemy who invades it, if they only conquer a few miles into Israel, they win the war because Israel doesn't have enough land in reserve to wage a counterattack, or to be surrounded on all sides of the country, not by Canada and Mexico, but by a billion fanatic jihadists. This is an experiential knowledge that cannot be passed to another person. Just like Brett Meador can't share with me the depths of, whatever traumas you carry or whatever experiential knowledge you carry from the experiences of your life. You can tell me about it and I can try to understand it academically or intellectually, but I can't connect with you where it's experienced unless I've experienced it. Americans live in a country that's thousands of miles wide. For the most part, they've only known peace their entire lives. 98% of them have never seen military service, have no idea what that entails, have no idea of what an existential threat entails. And that's impossible. That does influence how Americans, and even decent Americans, I'm not talking about people for whom it's already rigged against Israel. I'm talking about people who are fair-minded. It's hard to convince them what that's like, to live under such existential threat all the time. So that's where Israel is always in a losing proposition. There is no one really in the world that can relate to Israel's position. Maybe since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and again, regardless of what if you think politically on that issue, you can at least identify with the average Ukrainian on the ground, whose country was invaded. Maybe they too can sort of relate to it now, what it's like each day they realize, gee, my country may not exist tomorrow. Somebody's out to destroy me or somebody's out to take over where I live. But most of the world can't relate to it. And no matter how much Israel tries to explain it on CNN or Fox or any of these things, it's just an uphill battle, and it's an impossible hill to conquer, to share your experience, to get somebody else to be able to empathize with that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't see the solution for that, especially because not to try to over spiritualize it, but the the stuff I see against Israel when it comes to Gaza and some of that stuff, the worldview that's out there, it almost seems demonic in some way, where there's just the anti-Semitism, but it's not even that their eyes are blind or even unable to be empathetic toward a person who lives in Israel. There's a worldview out there that just seems just spiritually dark to me.
Well, one of the things I'm really grateful for, if there's anything to be grateful for from October 7th, is the moral clarity. People are really now showing their real souls for all to see. Now, I mentioned earlier in this interview, and I don't take it back, you have people that are even popular with Christians, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens today on her Twitter feed, which I follow because I like to follow, she's come out with all sorts of anti-Jewish stuff the last couple of weeks. She basically, in her latest post, claimed that the Jews are funding both sides of this war. They're funding the Iranians and they're funding, the Israelis. And these are the oldest tropes about the Rothschilds. These are the very things that Hitler himself peddled in. Or you have Tucker Carlson, who interviewed the Bethlehem Catholic, some Catholic, because he felt that too many American Christians are in Israel's pockets, we're the great manipulators and puppeteers of the American Christians, and therefore we have to have this Arab Bethlehem Christian to set it all straight. What I'm very grateful for about October 7th is the real, true people are being seen from where they stand. The moral clarity is become clearer than ever, and the Bible's truth that the subject of Israel is the great divider of our times. Yeah. And you'll appreciate this because I've heard you speak about this at your church, the civil war between those of us who believe in the biblical promises concerning Israel, that they're taken literally, versus the church supersessionists / replacement theologists. That too is heated up since October 7th. Yeah. So again, we're seeing the lines drawn clearer than ever since October 7th, and it's sort of become like this truth serum. It's bringing a lot of truth out of what a lot of people are truly made of. And I'm hoping that all the Christians in your audience are taking taking notes about all this. In other words, that they're seeing this, that maybe even some people who they often lionize and respected until October 7th have shown themselves to be less worthy of their respect. We need to have discernment, we really do. And hopefully one of the things that comes out of this conversation is that people will just dig deeper into the Bible. It's not enough to have a good pastor like you tell people what they should believe, and I love that you do that, but I want them to read the Bibles too. Yeah. If you only read the New Testament, or if you only read, you copy and paste certain verses from the Bible that you like, and you put them on your refrigerator because they express your favorite theology, for God so loved the world, that he sent his only begotten son, but you ignore what Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and all these people, Joel. The subject of Israel, Brett, takes up more pages of the Bible than any other subject in the Bible, including Jesus. And I'm saying this as a believer. I'm not saying this out of any sacrilege. Israel takes up more verses of the Bible than even verses about Jesus, even about, issues like abortion, even like all these issues that are cardinal issues in the Christian world. No one takes up as more substance in the Bible as Israel. So if you get the Israel issue wrong, you're biblically illiterate. You're either biblically illiterate or you're hostile towards what most of the Bible has to say.
Yeah, and we're seeing that huge in the American church. Andy Stanley saying we need to unhitch ourselves from the Old Testament. That's sadly people just not really appreciating the whole Word of God.
Well, look, it goes back, and I'll keep it very primitive and simple, but you who's well studied, you remember the church father, a guy by the name of Marcion, who was a heretic. And what did Marcion do? What was his whole cause in life? He wanted to separate the God of the Old Testament from the Jesus of the New Testament. Anything that reeked of that Jewish God either in the New Testament or the Old Testament, he wanted to cut out of the Bible, so that all that was left in his Bible were the books of Galatians, some Thessalonians. In other words, he basically knocked out most of the Bible, and for this reason he was called a heretic. Now, because he was called a heretic, most people think that Marcion lost. But I'm telling you that no, I think Marcion actually won. That you still have incredible chunks of Christianity that feel compelled to do away with the Jewish God. They actually, it's almost like Jesus is a totally different entity, and that is considered a heresy. Yeah. If you separate Jesus from the God of the Old Testament and turn them into like two opposing entities. Oh, the Old Testament God, he's all about the Jews and he's all about retribution and punishing the wicked. But, Jesus, he's like, Woodstock and, tie-dye shirts, and God forbid anybody get punched. That is heresy. That's long regarded as a heresy in the church. And I'm telling you, in some ways, that heresy has won the day among a lot of Christians. Yeah. They've succeeded to separate Yahweh, the God of Israel, from Jesus in the New Testament. And the two are meant, if you're a true Orthodox Christian, I'm not referring about Orthodox, right, the Greek Orthodox Church, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Then you must believe that Yahweh and Jesus are one. Yeah. And that means that whatever that God in the Old Testament is near and dear to his heart, is near and dear to Jesus. Now, somebody will say often in these arguments, but Jesus didn't, how come he doesn't mention all this stuff about Israel returning and and all that stuff? Well, the reason's very simple. His Bible was the Old Testament. That's it. Jesus came to add revelation, not replace previous revelation. Yeah. The New Testament is an addendum to the Old Testament. It's been added to the Old Testament. It's not there to refute or do away anything in the Old Testament. Yeah. So why am I getting into all this? To encourage whoever sees this, both in your church or on the internet, to be committed to knowing the whole Bible. Because guess what? God's going to hold them and entire nations to knowing the whole Bible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Amen. Yeah. What's gonna, people always talk about, when's Jesus coming back? Well, nobody knows the day or the hour, but it's going to be related to Israel. Israel, the nations of the world and how they deal with Israel, that's going to bring Jesus back, the Battle of Armageddon and all that stuff. So, you're right. People trying to separate that, they're missing.
Can I just say one more thing about that, Brett? If I can just mention two things that I think are relevant. Remember that in Acts, the very first chapter of Acts, his disciples come up to him and say, is now the time you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And notice, these were people that hung out with him for 3 years. They knew him better than any of us. At no time in his teaching of them in 3 years did they come away with the conclusion, oh, he's through with all that Jewish nonsense and all that land theology. After 3 years of hanging around these people, literally 24/7, living with him, sleeping next to him, eating hummus with him, they still ask him in Acts chapter 1, is now the time you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And notice he doesn't make fun of them and say, oh, you fools, don't you understand I'm doing? He says, now's not the time. You go about, your job's to be a witness from Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria to the world, and the Father has his appointed times. It was actually an affirmation of theology.
Yeah, that's good.
Let me just say one more thing, if you don't mind, because you got me on a roll. It's funny, when somebody told me I'm doing this at 10:30 at night, which is past my bedtime, I thought I wouldn't be talkative, and now I'm over talking. But the very famous passage in Matthew 25, where it says the nations, not individuals, the nations will be separated as goat nations. Mm-hmm. Now, that term nation comes from the expression Gentile. The Gentiles, nations will be separated. Some will be goats, some will be sheep. What determines who's the goats and who are the sheep? As they've done to Jesus's brethren. Now, of course, you could argue, but Jesus' brethren are just his fellow believers. And there's truth to that. But the Bible is multi-layered. And I've always believed especially since it's dividing them into nations and the goats and the sheep, not as individuals, that it's how they treated the Jews throughout history and how they treat the Jews in the end times. I think that too is spoken about in the book of Matthew, chapter 25.
Amen. I 100% agree with you. How do you treat Israel? That's going to be a big deal. Steve, this has been outstanding. Would you be willing to come back and do this again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to being with you guys in Turkey and having these type of discussions at dinner, of course, informally, and then also formally, as you said, on the boat. And hopefully our paths will cross one day in this hemisphere as well.
Yeah, exactly. Your tour guiding business has not really been that great since October 7th.
Yes, I definitely wanted to correct that one thing that you said. I'm definitely not retired. I'm unemployed.
Oh, okay.
What happened was the year before, last year, I worked almost as full-time as I've ever worked, 18 tour groups.
Wow.
So I've returned to work fully, and unfortunately, because of Corona for 2 years and this war, unemployed 3 out of 4 years. Right, because of nothing that I have control over. But I'm still tour guide, and I'm still scheduled for tours, and now I fear for my fall groups. I lost the fall and I lost this whole year, and I was hoping I would salvage next year. But already 1 or 2 groups in my fall have started to cancel. So I'm like, how much unemployment can a person take? So.
Well, we're praying for you, Steve. We love you. It's good. Thanks for. Let's give Steve a big round of applause. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, guys. Oh, and don't forget updates on YouTube occasionally on my channel, which is also known as Steve the Tour Guide.
Yes, the YouTube channel.
Yes.
Yeah, Steve the Tour Guide. If you want to follow his channel, he does outstanding little updates and even some really cool teachings from the Old Testament. You've been in. Were you in Ezra?
I was going through Ezra. Yeah.
No, so definitely check Steve the Tour Guide out on YouTube, and we'll stay in touch. You should post this on your web channel.
All right. Well, Brett, I loved it. I felt like I was with you on Athey Creek.
Yeah, amen, buddy. God bless you.
Yeah.
We'll talk to you later.
You too, everybody. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Have a great evening, and God bless you all. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.